learn terminology.
Sure.
Not 1 acre, 2 acres,
Panhandle Health is that lady.
13 to 26.2.
He's texting people of maybe getting some stairs. Yeah.
You know, this is probably before his time.
Right, right.
So as you show to him.
Kevin, we're gonna start. It's 8 o'clock. You might as well just give him your phone number right now.
He got my card.
There you go. That's how that goes. And so should we wait a little bit for more of your group?
I do have 2 other people come in. They may filter in. We could probably, I'm more than happy to get started, and they'll be here mostly to help answer questions.
Yeah, the traffic coming in from down there, was not fun.
No worries. Okay, well, thank everybody for coming to our DEQ panel. All of this stuff needs to disappear. Otherwise, it's going to go to one home with 3 kids who are waiting for sugar. So today we have DEQ, and we have Dan here. There will be more people from DEQ to have the discussion about what their department does. I kind of gave him a rundown of some of the issues that Bonner County identifies as concerns with respect to water quality, water availability, and what is their enforcement opportunities. Since we have a small crowd, we're not going to do the cards, but I want to remind everybody that 45 minutes is not that long. And some of these questions are very detailed. If you have a historical issue that you want to address, I am encouraging people to get the contact information and do that outside of the chat. This is to give people the information about their department and ask some pointed questions, but not specific to something that's coming up on a hearing or litigation, because they cannot give that response, okay? So with that, I will allow Dan to give an introduction about himself and his department, and then we will move forward with questions. And please feel free to get up and get a snack. And just on ours, we are recording it, so if you make sure you talk into the speaker, that'll be fantastic. So
all right, very good.
Away.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. So my name is Dan McCracken. I'm the Regional Administrator for the Department of Environmental Quality in our Coeur d'Alene Regional Office. So just to give kind of a quick overview of the Department of Environmental Quality, we're a state executive branch agency. So we're kind of organized on the government org chart. We're report to the governor. We have a director based in Boise, 6 regional offices, and kind of our state headquarters down in Boise. As an agency, we have about 375 full-time employees. In Coeur d'Alene, we're about 36. So about 10% of our workforce is based out of Coeur d'Alene, and we cover the 5 northern counties. Our mission as an agency is to protect public health and the quality of Idaho's air, land, and water. And the way we do that is through state rules. We were established in 1972 with a statute called the Idaho Environmental Protection and Health Act, passed by the legislature. That gave DEQ the authority to form we actually started as a division under the Department of Health and Welfare. Later, the statute was amended and we became a separate state department. And so we have Title 39 of Idaho Code provides the statute that was in that original piece of legislation that was passed by the legislature. And then we have a chapter of rules, Idaho IDAPA 58 kind of provides our rules. And generally those cover kind of our core programs, our air quality, water quality in both surface water and wastewater, waste management and remediation, and drinking water are kind of our core service areas. So we have separate subchapters of rules for each of those programs. And our staff in Coeur d'Alene work with regulated entities, so public drinking water systems, public wastewater systems, facilities that store waste, facilities that have smokestacks and have air emissions discharges, those types of things. We conduct inspections and generally work with facilities and regulated entities to make sure that they're meeting what's required in our rules. So that's kind of I wanted, I guess, just to give a really brief kind of introduction. That's kind of basically what we do. And then my understanding is you guys are have an opportunity to give pointed questions here kind of specifically about maybe some land development growth. That's kind of a hot topic across the state. So I'll open it up now if you guys have specific questions. If not, I can go into, if you want to give some leading topics.
So I'm going to give you that. Can you add in what your enforcement process is? Because that will open up a
Sure.
whole different line of questioning before we pass it on.
So our regulatory framework, one of our specific chapters in IDAPA provides kind of our enforcement authority under that Idaho Environmental Protection and Health Act. So if someone violates our rules, we generally work to enter into some kind of enforcement agreement. Typically, that's in the form of a consent order. So it's a legal agreement that goes through the court that identifies which of our rules was broken, or which part of our statute was violated, and what kind of action would be required to correct what's been violated. And sometimes that's can be accompanied by fines. The fines are kind of set in statute of kind of what those can be. Typically, the maximum we can do if something's really egregious for most of our rules is about a $10,000 fine. So for individuals, it's kind of sounds like a lot of money. For large facilities, it's really not very much money at all. We have other programs where we have primacy for some federal rules. So on the wastewater side of things, our Idaho Pollution Discharge Elimination System is the state of Idaho's authority for the Clean Water Act discharge program. Those have higher fines because it's kind of again, it's our primacy of federal Clean Water Act, and there's a little bit more kind of teeth behind it, I guess. So some of those you'll see things, some of those will be, $30,000 on a, if something's been dumped into a lake or something without a permit, and we can show that it's caused an issue with water quality standards. Though things like that sometimes can add up a little bit faster. But
hi, so I just have kind of a what if question. So if a sewer district is already over capacity, and they have admitted that, and then the Board of Commissioners approves, let's say, a large subdivision in that sewer district, and saying like, we're just going to punt this kind of down the road. And then the agency DEQ has also said, yeah, we agree this is over capacity. Why are the commissioners able to approve something when the sewer district is already over capacity? What is your enforcement capabilities there? So
in a minute, I'm going to phone a friend. Right behind you is Katie Baker-Casile, our engineering manager.
She's got to sit up.
And also Bob Steed, who's our surface water manager. So I'll maybe call them up to both come sit up here now and help field questions. But I'll start with just kind of a basic kind of division of who's responsible for what. So under kind of the rules of Idaho, local land use planning is the responsibility of local government. So depending on where you are in the state, that is some combination of the counties and cities. So if you're in city limits, the cities are responsible for land use planning within their city limits. And on a county level, if you're outside of city limits, counties are responsible for land use planning. So the decision of should we allow a certain development to occur, if you wanted to build, if local government who's elected by the local people in an area decided we want the next New York City to be in Bonner County. People show up they elect their commissioners, they participate in the public process, and we want to build skyscrapers. How DEQ's role fits into that is because local government's responsibility is to decide what do we want to put here. Our job is to make sure that we meet the requirements for protecting, air, land, water, public health. So if you want to build a skyscraper and that houses, say, 20,000 people, our interest would be to make sure that you're able to provide safe drinking water for those people to drink, and that when they flush the toilet, there's somewhere for that water to go in a way that protects surface water quality. So really, we're not in the business of saying you can't build that. We would just say, if you want to build that, you need to show us how you're going to provide safe drinking water, and show us basically if you were going to build, say, something that housed 20,000 people, you would be generating a lot of wastewater, and you would probably need a wastewater treatment plant. And we would review the plans for your wastewater treatment plant and make sure that it meets all of our rules and you're treating the water before it is either discharged to surface water or the lake, or potentially land applied via a recycled water permit. So that's kind of the division of labor on that. Sure.
Thanks. Okay, so if a jurisdiction approves that skyscraper and they cannot show you that they have safe drinking water or they have a place to put their sewage, can you not step in?
So Katie, maybe I'm going to hand it off to Katie here. So once something has been approved, so if they have, presuming that they got permission from local government to build their project, then we would kind of step in once it gets to the point where they actually are required to build, say, the treatment system, or put the pipes in the ground to serve water. That's where we would then step in. And I'll kind of have Katie talk a little bit about that.
So that is my team's job, is to review all projects to ensure that they meet the minimum requirements of the rules, that they have planning in place to ensure that those systems that they're building will provide safe drinking water and a safe place to flush your toilet to now and in the future.
Katie, I'm going to ask you to speak up, because although I see Doug's hand, sometimes that's his comment, is to talk louder on the Zoom world. But I will go to Doug after she answers this.
So there are processes in place. There has to be engineered documentation that demonstrates the capacity and the capability to do the things they say they're going to do. There are cities in our area, in our 5 northern counties, that I have said no to projects that were brought forward by developers. The council had said yes. I happened to be at the council meeting where their engineer said, actually, we only have enough water to serve 700 connections. We're currently serving 1,200. And yes, developer, you can move forward with your development. And I was like, guys, I can't approve your projects knowing this information. So they are stalled out until the city does provide sources for that water. So
Let's go to Doug and Maureen online. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying in terms of the enforcement at the downstream part, but it's pretty common for you folks when a project is first proposed as a development for you to not respond, and it seems to me like at least saying something cautionary at that point. You wouldn't be prohibiting, of course, but you would simply express legitimate concerns. As you said, with this huge building coming in, if simply saying at that point that there is no demonstrated capability for the water, both incoming and outgoing, to get dealt with. I don't understand why so often you don't respond in the early stage.
And maybe this is a question of the timeline. So once the county receives their project, where is the appropriate spot in the timeline of a project for DEQ to give some substantial information to the public? Because I think as a public, sometimes we see the project and we're looking farther ahead than we feel the county is looking at the project. But then we look to agency comments, and as Doug said, sometimes there's no comment. And with Panhandle Health, sometimes they've said, because we can't give one because you guys didn't do a test hole. So is there something that we could change from the county level that would give us more concrete information earlier on in a project, at least to the people, knowing that you can't make the city or the county do something? Is that kind of where you're going, Doug?
That's correct. You've expressed my concern
Okay.
pretty darn well.
Okay. All right. So I'll give it back to you, Katie.
So when those county requests for comments come in, it is a small piece of the job that I do. I'm also in charge of ensuring that my staff are reviewing and when they approve projects, they are in accordance with the rules. So I guess a lot of the times those applications come in, they don't have information telling me exactly where that water is going to come from, where their toilets are going to flush to. I have to go digging through our records. And if the system that they're connecting to did not submit historic records, I don't have any information to be able to even make a comment. But it does take an exorbitant amount of time to dig through those old records and go reading through, say, a facility planning document that outlines this is the system where it's at the time that document was created, and then this is the capabilities of that system moving forward, and these are the projects that need to happen. Sometimes those are 300-page documents, and in order to fully answer that question, I would have to re-review that or review that for the first time to be able to even answer the question of, do they have capacity? I don't know that off the top of my head for 400 plus water systems.
So we'll go here.
Can I add to that? So I think in kind of an ideal world, if all of the existing, so I think there's kind of two scenarios. If there's say a new development coming in, it's our preference, generally speaking, just in terms of what's most straightforward for DEQ to approve, is it's going to connect to an existing public water system and public wastewater system. And that existing public water system and wastewater system is required to have an existing facility plan, which is kind of equivalent to like a master plan that says, as the community grows, we're going to be adding connections in these little areas as development occurs. And when someone said, we would like to put in this new neighborhood here, it would already be in the system that they're going to connect to. It would already be in their facility plan. We're planning for an extra 200 connections here for future development for this neighborhood. And all that would already be planned out. And when that kind of application comes in, we would look at it directly and say, yep, that's consistent with what's in the existing facility plans. Alternatively, if they're building in an area where perhaps it's not available to them to connect to an existing system, they would be having to build their own new public system, which is considerably more work to then do all of the planning documents that are required and engineering work to demonstrate that we're going to build this new facility. It's going to provide wastewater treatment and clean drinking water for 200 people. Here's what that looks like. Typically, a land developer is not going to go through the cost to develop all that engineering work until they know whether or not they're going to get approval to put in the 200 units. So this is where there's kind of a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation, because, and I think we see a lot of projects like this that come in, the developer's not sure necessarily if they're going to get approval to connect to an existing system, if they're going to have to build their own one, if they're even going to get approval to, sometimes they need zoning changes, things like that, to be able to put in their project. They don't know which of that is going to be allowed. And so they kind of put something out there to begin with, just to see kind of what will get approved, what conditions might be put on that. And so there's not necessarily a clear plan that comes to DEQ, and it's not necessarily our job to say, yes, you can put in the 200 houses or not. It's at some point, they're going to get to a point where they're not going to be able to put pipe in the ground until they have an approved facility plan and preliminary engineering report that shows here's where we're connecting the pipes, here's where the pipes go in the ground. We approve that, but it's totally possible for them to get sometimes all the way through a project where they've subdivided lots, they've sold it to people. Sometimes there's houses under construction, and we've had some cases there's houses already in place, and they haven't quite yet figured out exactly where all the water is going to go. I mean, that's it works out that way sometimes, and it's admittedly much less than ideal.
Kevin?
Yeah, you just give me so many. You give me so many ways to go here, but I guess I'll start out hopefully here with what Doug was bringing up about. It seems like you don't respond, and so I know that's kind of unfair or whatever, because I know you guys have a lot of things on your table coming at you or whatever. But I'm going to lead off with the don't respond, because I'm sure you guys have MOAs, MOUs with IDWR, the Corps of Engineers. As per you say that you guys have state laws that you have to follow, whatever, and not that you have to follow, but you have to make the public follow. And so, as if most everybody here is interested in new construction or whatever, whether it's tying into an existing system of a city or whether it's rural and you got to make your own.
Can I get you to the question though, Kevin?
Yeah, probably not, because it's all fits
Well,
together
so
here.
you have to consider, should this be one that you talk to them privately on? Because we want to ask the question so more people can ask.
Well, one of the things, I guess I'll try to get to a question here somewhere down the line as I get to the end. You were talking about enforcement, and so and you were talking about you guys typically maybe have a 10,000, I guess, a day fee, because I know with a Sackett case or whatever.
What's the question, Kevin?
Yeah,
I gotta cut you to a
the
question.
Sackett case, that was a federal enforcement through EPA. That we weren't involved in that one.
So partly I'm hearing you guys give an answer of it's the timeline, and you guys don't necessarily have the enforcement of the entities. You have your real teeth come to the end of the project, going to the ground, the water, that's where your final is. And that can be a problem we're causing at the county city level for DEQ. Would that be accurate?
It can be just depending on the sequence of things, depending on the order that things get approved.
Okay.
Certainly, it can put us in a position where, yeah, the train's already moving down the tracks by the time we get an opportunity to enforce on what we're allowed to enforce upon.
So when it comes to enforcement, how much of what you can and can't do or what's in your wheelhouse is determined by statute versus rules that are created within your agency, right? Like the 3-letter federal agencies create their own rules left and right that are not statute. So, and I'm asking that partly because when commenting on an application that's been filed is too much work for you, can you not put that burden on the developer? Because you're talking about cases that go all the way through to the point where people have bought homes and then they have a sewage issue or, that's not right to the buyer. It's not right to anybody. And then part 2 of that is if your limitation is, say, $10,000 per incident or whatever, most developers, I would think, would just call that cost of doing business.
Correct.
So who establishes those levels?
So that's in statute. With regard to the other, so everything that's in Title 39 that's the statute that created DEQ. Our rule chapters, we're a little bit different, I guess, than a federal agency. Our rulemaking process is it's an open public process. We publish rule bulletins that we have to go through. Take input from the public on what the rules are. Typically, we get much more involvement, I guess I would say, from like industry in our rulemaking process. So the developers are the ones coming to the table, and the public water systems are the ones coming to the table, participating in what those rules are. I would say, generally speaking, much more so than the general public. And then those go before the legislature every year. So it's not something that DEQ just kind of makes up our own rules in a vacuum and then everyone's stuck with what we come up with. It's a very public process, has to get approved by the legislature every single year.
And before she asks her question, can you explain to the public how they can be part of hearing what's happening at that meeting? Because I'm sure that's a follow-up.
Sure, yeah. Probably the easiest thing would be for me to point you to the DEQ website, deq.idaho.gov. We have a specific page on there that has all of our public comment periods and public processes that are open at any given time. And we put, I believe we have a calendar on there for which chapters are going through negotiated rulemaking at any given time. So.
Thank you.
So are there any cities or counties that have the developer come to you guys first instead of the way that we're doing it in Bonner County where it's after the fact?
I would say Kootenai County's requirements are probably the most stringent in the 5 northern counties. That's my experience realm, is the 5 northern counties. They do not allow final plat until the water and sewer has been signed off on by DEQ. And so there's multiple projects where I've had large developers going, DEQ, you're holding me up because you haven't approved this. And I'm going, actually, you haven't given me enough documentation to do so. I can't say that you have adequate water and sewer to do the things you're planning to do. And so that's then been pretty sticky. But I would also point to not all the developers I end up working with are large firms. One of them recently was a high school teacher who had a piece of property north of here, and he wanted to, as part of his retirement plan, develop that property. So it was a 18 lot subdivision that he was doing and ended up having to create a public water system. So some of them, $10,000 is make or break.
Another thing that we see sometimes is, so Katie brought up that, that Kootenai County, they don't allow finalizing the plat really until all that stuff is figured out. Inside city limits, I mean, like within city limits is, I would say, another level even more stringent than that. City of Coeur d'Alene operates their own drinking water and wastewater system, so that makes it a little bit easier for them because they don't have, dozens of different systems to kind of coordinate and figure out which system is going to serve it. The other thing I guess I would add to that is that now I've lost my train of thought.
We've been there.
Can I ask a follow-up and then?
Okay.
Follow up. What is your biggest concern for Bonner County?
My biggest concern for Bonner County, I do think that I think this is maybe not even unique to Bonner County. I think across the whole state, I think that the single largest concern across the state for protecting water quality and things that are critical to DEQ's mission is land development and growth. I mean, that I think over the history of the state, we've worked through a lot of challenges with, we started mining 100 years before the Clean Water Act passed. We've similar with the timber industry, we dealt with, clear cuts and things without any rules long before we had any environmental regulations at all. Most of those things have kind of, we've figured out how to do those kinds of things in a way that is protective of the environment. But inevitably, as you add more people to any area, it changes the natural landscape, which comes with changes to the air, land, and water. So as we add more people to Idaho, that puts a significant stress on our natural resources, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of planning to kind of figure out how to do that in a way where you still have clean water on the back end of it. I think we pride ourselves as a state that is, that operates with minimal regulations. We like to, we all like the freedom that comes with living in Idaho, and we like to say that we try to accomplish what we need to do with our regulations with the lightest touch possible. So we're kind of already, just by political philosophy, kind of dancing on the line of not doing quite enough. We want to do just enough, but not too much, which puts us at risk of perhaps not doing enough. And if we, if we experience rapid growth, those are kind of situations that tend to stress us. You tend to need more rules and kind of government involvement the more people you have. And we've lived very happily for a long time as a pretty rural state, and there's fewer things to go wrong the fewer people you have. We add more people and more growth, and that creates challenges.
Good morning. I have kind of a related question, and the focus is the comp plan. You use the analogy of the train leaving the station, and I think what we notice, and it's related to the number of people that come in, we see a bunch of train wrecks, right? So you oversee 5 counties. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the differences in the comp plan, the groundwork that's laid in the very beginning that guides land use decisions, do you think that there are differences in the comp plan that make more or less problems for you? That's one question.
Definitely.
Katie is smiling. She has chapters.
Chapters and chapters and chapters. That document that I said sometimes is 300 pages. Many times it's non-existent.
So
there are a multitude of systems in our 5 northern counties that have no comprehensive plan whatsoever. They have no facility planning. They have no plan of where they're going or what they need to do. So I think that, for me, that's kind of my hill to die on. I preach it nonstop. You need a facility plan. You need to know the paths for where you could potentially go to be able to plan appropriately for growth.
So since comprehensive plans are so important, how often is it the case that a county tries to construct a comprehensive plan without a professional guiding the process? And to the extent that you don't have a professional guiding the process, do you likely wind up with problems, from your end?
And countywide comprehensive plans, I don't review those. I don't see those. I see them for individual water and wastewater systems. And those may or may not dovetail with a bigger picture plan. So I'm not sure that I can even answer
So
that
I think
question.
to change what, I see where you're going. I think the question would better be, how does the involvement between the county and DEQ when they're developing their facility section improve the outcomes within what is in your purview of water quality? Instead of identifying whether someone's a professional or not, because they wouldn't know that. But it's the communication of how they're developing the plan and including the issues that pertain to DEQ that might change your outcome. Do you see that collaboration happening? And would that improve some of the issues that some of the people, because here it's more representative of the people having concerns of DEQ. Would that be a move in a good direction?
I think so. I think it's fair to say that there's probably significant room for improvement on the coordination between DEQ and counties in the development of their comprehensive planning. In my time at DEQ, that's not been something that we've spent a whole lot of time, sitting down and talking to counties about. Are there areas where we know that our existing wastewater and drinking water systems are close to capacity? How does that fit in with what we have laid out for what we see as areas of growth, things like that? So that's something I think would
question.
Be beneficial. Yeah.
And I'm not a planner, so I'm just looking at this like, what's going on. Like this gentleman said, the agencies are required to comment, and a lot of times there's no comment, or there's just kind of a standard copy and paste. Mm-hmm. I just don't understand, if these agencies are all involved in decision making, why you all kind of can't get together at the comprehensive planning process stage so that all of your concerns are expressed, and to make sure that the document, which is going to be used for at least a decade, isn't the best document that it possibly can be.
And I'm going to take, no, we're not before, because there's people that have already done a line here. I'm going to answer that, and I think that part is the responsibility of the county to develop that relationship and take our comp plan to DEQ and ask them for guidance the way we're doing now. I think that's part of some of the frustration, and I think that's what is good about the chat, to let people understand we have an obligation as the county to get that input and to put people in positions to develop the relationship, so that when that development comes through, we know that we can reach out and say, this is something we've talked about, and we get meaningful input. And I think that's a lot of what we're getting from a lot of the people that are coming to the chats, is understanding what they are there for our resource. What we're asking them sometimes is, you guys actually do the function that we are failing at. And I think that's not a reasonable expectation of an agency. I think this is that opportunity of Bonner County, now you've heard, to start asking about DEQ issues in your county. What are we going to do as residents of Bonner County and elected officials of Bonner County to improve that communication, which starts with something like this exposure? Doug, do you have your hand up for a question? Because I want to, if you don't, I want to go from, we've talked about development and systems. We need to move to a little bit on individual wells going in, minor land divisions increasing. And I know Susan, so I knew we were going. Doug?
I do have a question. Or comment related question. I understand what you're saying in terms of where there's lots and lots of small water treatment or water supply systems, but there's an awful lot, at least of what I've seen in Bonner, where you have truly rural things coming in, being divided up from 20-acre plots down to 5 or less, and it seems like it only takes a map and knowing the location of these things to figure out that there's a potential for a problem, and simply responding instead of not responding at all in the early stage. So I was wondering if you could comment about how that might happen.
So maybe I need to get together with the planning folks and talk about how our comments or lack of comments sometimes are presented. So typically we provide a standard. It will look like something that's probably not very helpful. It's a standard letter that basically describes what DEQ's rules are, and we recommend that that people connect to an existing facility. I mean, it kind of more or less in really vague language describes kind of a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And I recognize that it would be really nice if we had like a really detailed technical review of every single proposal.
Doug, can you mute your line, please, Doug?
Yes. But that would be way better than no comment.
Yeah.
So I think on that issue, it comes to actually what Katie is saying is, we're not giving you information to do anything other than a boilerplate response.
Right.
So what can we do to change what we're asking you so that we can get a substantial response that lets the community know where you're going?
Yeah.
And I think that it's the timeline question. I will
Yeah.
let Susan
I
ask
think-
the question I anticipated her to ask.
Well, so we already have quite a few lots in Bonner County that don't have water, and they have to go to the fairgrounds to get their water. They don't have potable water. So I don't understand how those got created. And then we also have a situation where they're continuing to be created because there's no aquifer. And we all know that it's hard to know what's under the ground there as far as water. And when you're creating a subdivision or even just 1 or 2 lots, I don't understand how it can be that lots can be created that don't have potable water. Because wouldn't that fall to you that people need to have potable water, or is that really just the county's responsibility? And if it is their responsibility, do you have any involvement in it whatsoever?
We do not have any involvement in whether a private well is permitted or not, or whether there's even water there. I only get to deal with public drinking water systems, and those are defined as 15 service connections or 25 individuals daily for at least 60 days out of the year. So it's only systems that serve that quantity of people are what I get to have overview of.
Okay, so would that only then be city, like piped systems, or would that be a well as well?
It could be a well serving 10 lots, because typically the average is 2.54 persons per home, so that equates to about 25 people.
Okay, so then wouldn't you have a requirement for that well as gallons per minute or?
Correct.
So you would
If
only.
it is to be a public system.
Yes.
But if someone comes in and says, okay, I have 200 acres, I want to turn it into 20-acre lots, and I'm going to put individual wells on them, there's no public water system there. And and even if they didn't, it's not against the law to have a 20-acre parcel without water. Because it could be used for lots of different things. So that comes to the county's responsibility in land use planning, is deciding, how do we want our land to be used? Maybe we want some of it to be, dry timber property that's not going to be used for residential use. So I think what's happened over time in Idaho is, we used to have lots of property that we just assumed it was always going to be forested timber property or agricultural use, or, when people came and homesteaded out here, if it was rock like this covered in, that was not useful property. You couldn't farm it. There was no water there. You couldn't live on it. And we assumed that it would just always be like that. And our rules were set up where people from other places said, gosh, you could make a lot of money if you chopped this up into smaller pieces and sold it. And people started doing that, and we didn't really have a good plan for it.
Thank you for that. I just want to express a frustration that I think everybody in every rural county is facing right now, which is that there seems to be a lot of the jurisdiction pointing there and the state pointing there, and then we're caught in the middle. And so that's nothing against you, but I'm just saying that's a great frustration for us folks in every county, and that know that we're going to run out of water, and that the state, I guess, needs to step in. Would that be your assumption, that it's the state that's going to need to step in?
So, in terms of running out of water, we actually don't deal with quantity of water. We only deal with quality of water. So when we start talking water quantity or wells drying up, that's the responsibility of the State Department of Water Resources, that is responsible for issuing water rights, deciding who was first, those kinds of things. That kind of gets into a whole nother realm of the law that DEQ really doesn't participate in. Our involvement, as Katie pointed out, is if it's a public water system that can't provide enough water for their people to have drinking water, then we get involved from that sense, because it becomes a public health issue. But in terms of subdividing lands and issuing well permits and things, that all happens with water resources.
How do you determine your water quality is going down? Is there signs that we could look for to reach out to you, or?
For what type of water quality, I guess, are you talking about? Like drinking water, like for drinking water, or like looking at streams or lakes, or what?
So I was thinking more drinking water.
Drinking water. Yeah. So for our public systems, they're required to monitor water quality, and they have to meet the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we have standards for, a huge number of constituents that could be in drinking water that have health effects, and they're required to sample those, send it off to a lab, and report the data to us. If you have a private well, that's your responsibility as a private well owner to, we would recommend sampling for bacteria and things like that on a regular basis. But we do not monitor individual private wells for water quality.
Can I ask you a question on, in Bonner County, we have a lot of people that are wells. They're not on public systems, especially in our rural areas, not incorporated. So what can those residents of Bonner County do to ensure the safety of their water and availability, when it sounds like your group is focused more on the public system, not the individual wells? So we do minor land divisions where in some ways we're getting around what would cause you guys to get, more involved in projects that we're doing. And as we do that, I'm hearing that that's a potential disservice if we're talking about individual wells on a minor land division where there's 10 wells that get punched in, because in some areas that would have been a public system. But the way some of our projects are, you guys are removed from that completely, which then seems like there's a greater risk to our county residents because it's not reviewed. Is that an accurate thing? And what do you do? Is that happening in other counties? And is there a recommendation that we need to give residents that are on wells, because they're not all community public?
It is not unique to this county. It is statewide. We, in the engineering group, we have these conversations routinely. I get calls from frustrated citizens regularly going, who's protecting me from my water? Who's protecting the safety of my water? And unfortunately, if you're 9 or less connections on a well, that's the homeowner's responsibility. And it's not an agency's responsibility to ensure that that water is safe and drinkable.
The other thing on that, just, I guess advice that I would have is on the water quantity side of things, the state law. So this is Department of Water Resources, and if you haven't had them as a guest, they might be a good one to come in as well. But the state law is set up to issue water rights. It's not necessarily in their purview to be kind of forecasting water use. It's really to issue water rights and keep track of who is first in time, first in right. So really where all that comes into to use is when there is a shortage of water, who gets it? It's not, you're not going to get any water, it's you're last in line. Once you have wells and pumps and people start pumping water out of the ground, the water doesn't really know whose turn it is to pull the water out. And so then you have to go to the court to sort out whose turn it was to pull the water and who gets it. That's a really terrible situation for anyone to be in. And it's kind of, it's unfortunate that really, like, it's kind of an administrative process for something that becomes a very practical problem to people's, livelihood, being able to pull water and turn the faucet on at their house. But the system is really put in place just to kind of keep track of who was there first. And it's a good situation to try and avoid. If you can do a lot of planning ahead of time and not have to get to that point where the court decides whose water it is, I would encourage people to do a lot of planning to avoid that situation.
Cheryl?
For the water systems that are coming out of the lake, the public water systems, what control do you have over what chemicals are put into the lake, like to kill algae and all that? Is that your department?
Yeah, good one.
I know you looked up and said it's 8:45.
Yeah.
Look at the time.
So algicide is an interesting one that actually falls primarily under Department of Agriculture, although we are involved in it.
That's another group we have to chat with.
So generally speaking, you can't just go apply any chemical to surface water without a permit. There are specific activities though that are coordinated through the Department of Agriculture where there are exemptions where you have to be applying at least 80 acres before it triggers the need for a general permit from us. If you're a waterfront property owner and you're going to treat a really small area just around your dock, there are things like that actually don't trigger the need for our permit. This is kind of similar to on the drinking water wastewater side, where we don't really get involved until we're talking a bigger, 80 acres or more kind of an application, and the individual property owner applications are kind of under our radar, so to speak.
I was thinking of the public water systems, like Odin Water System comes out of the bay there. Well, when they treat the shallow areas, which is where the water system goes out.
Yeah. So if and Bob can maybe jump in here. So if someone is doing a large application, there's no public notice requirements that they're required to do. And so things like the public water systems and any individual, if someone has a water right to pull, even just for an individual system, they should be getting a notice that says, here's what's being applied, here's when it's being applied, kind of all those kinds of details so that they are aware. Bob, do you have anything to add on?
That's something that we would like to improve. We've got a general permit that they have to apply for application. That general permit has not been updated in a couple of years, and notification is one of the issues that we will, on the next version of it, will make sure that that's upgraded. It is required on the current one, but it just doesn't seem to be enforced.
All right, we are out of time.
Can I add just one thing real
Yeah.
quick? I do the surface water section, so more of the ecology, where Katie does the engineering side of things. And I did meet with the planning commissioners a couple months ago and looked at the comprehensive plan at that time. It has a lot of facts and everything. I'm trying to come up with the products that will help the counties on that planning. And you got to realize there's a scalar problem. So when you're talking about individual households, I really don't have comments on specific pieces of property. My comments are generally for the whole stream that's in that area or lake that's in that area. And so that is a complication when we get requests from the county to give our comments. I can't really talk about that individual property. I'm requesting out of Boise in the state office to get some tools built together for more non-point source activity for these type of comments. What I'd like to have is a current updatable GIS map that your planners can go in and they say, hey, this property is in a watershed that's got problems with sediment, problems with temperature, and here's the list of BMPs that should be considered for that development in that area.
BMPs being best management practices.
Thank you.
So, but I do need some support moving forward with that, because it's something that Kootenai County wants as well. And it's the kind of, in the past, we've been able to deal with it because the rate of development wasn't what we're seeing today. And now we're just overwhelmed. And I got to tell you, a lot of the stuff that's coming across my desk, I just look, is there a lake or a stream next door? I just do not have the capacity for the volume of development we're getting right now.
Well, we could go longer, but we are out of time. I know technology is, they have to set up our next meeting, but I think we got a lot of direction of what we need to do, especially in our county. Our focus from a lot of people is the individual and the impact of wells, which is not on the radar, but there's things that we can do to help improve the process moving forward and a better understanding of what you can and cannot do, which is a lot of what our frustrations in some communities are, is we think that DEQ can come in and fix it, and that's clearly not what you can do. So thank you for coming. I appreciate all the questions that you guys fielded without any irritation from our repeated, why can't you find us higher, so we stop. But thank you so much. And so technology can end the recording. Thank you.